The idea behind the show is simply asking guests what they would tell a stranger on a plane if they were sitting next to them and the stranger asked them for advice.
The scenery is passing very fast, but the seer is constant. The one who's seeing is the same.
Let me appreciate you for asking a question that I haven't been asked after 2,500 or so interviews over the years.
Is you have to drop the ego, which is everyone's greatest obstacle.
In 2008, Grant and I had been married for 4 years. I was pregnant with my first child. The economy was collapsing, and we were on the verge of losing everything financially.
Welcome, everybody. So excited to be back with the latest episode of this show, The Enlightened Passenger. And today, our enlightened passenger is Lisa Wilson. And so, Lisa, so excited to have you here. And Lisa, where we usually start off the show, my other long-form show, I'll usually ask people to tell us a bit about themselves. But as I mentioned to you off air, we don't have as much time for that in this one. So that's why we do an intro off the top. But I like to jump in with really big questions right away. So I'm going to jump in with this big question of how do you personally define success? Like, what does success mean to you?
Well, it changes all the time, Corey. It really does. I think when I first started, it was about climbing the corporate ladder. So kind of what everybody puts out there for you, right? You got to climb that corporate ladder. And for me, that was human resources. So it was becoming an HR director. Somewhere along the way, though, I realized the stress that was putting on me. And so now success looks more like how I'm feeling in every moment. So even if I'm making a lot of money, if I'm so stressed out and a horrible person behind the scenes, that's not success. So it really now more is in how I feel and the feeling of that. So if I'm successful, i.e., I've done something that I plan to do, I've reached a goal. If I get there and it doesn't feel good, it's no longer success.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
I have to say, I've asked that question many, many times, i.e. thousands, and I've never had that answer. So I love that. Yeah, I just love that because it's a lot of people, and there's no judgment. Obviously, the definition is as different as people are different. But most people talk about kind of what it means to them in terms of it's almost never material, which is kind of cool. Like when you ask people who've been there, done that, it's almost never material stuff, but it's often they define it kind of like how they live their day and stuff like that. But I don't think I've heard it many times around the feeling. So in other words, how I'm feeling helps me determine if that was a successful, let's say, day, or if I'm on the path to success or what have you. So I love that. And let me follow up with maybe an equally big question, this idea of what we call legacy. So again, very big question, but I'd like to just get the idea of what does legacy mean to Lisa Wilson?
I think that's another thing that's been changing for me, because legacy for me was an Oprah Winfrey or someone who's huge that everyone knows. But I don't think that's what matters as much anymore. I was recently at a funeral for a gentleman that passed away, and his legacy was pretty huge. When you listen to how people spoke about him, I mean, he was famous in Cochrane, Ontario. It's a small little town of, 4,500 people. So he was famous there, but certainly, obviously not famous all over the world. But what he left behind was a trail of people who he had touched and made feel good. So I got to speak at his funeral. He was a very good friend of mine. And things that he did, he was the type of person that would reach out when something happened. So I did something really stupid in my 20s in a small town. When you do something stupid, everybody knows, and you just feel horrible. You absolutely feel horrible. You don't want to walk anywhere. You don't want to go out in the streets because you know that everyone's looking at you and they're judging you. And they are. It's not a thought in your head. They're looking at you and they're judging you. He picked up the phone and he called me and he said, "Lisa, we don't think any less of you. We've all done what you did. We did it just like you when you were younger. It was a mistake. Let it go." And so for me now, legacy is no longer about necessarily being the most famous person, but it's about who I affect along the way and how I affect them.
I love that. And I love as well how that's changed for you over time. I mean, that's one of these things that I think often we forget that it's okay if these things change. They don't have to be
Yeah.
call it static. They can be ever changing. So let me follow that up and say and ask you, I guess, speaking of these kind of ever sort of moving targets, if you will.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm getting another big question here, but what does I talk about purpose for me is like vitamin P. I always say it's the vitamin that you can't buy in the stores, but it may be the most important vitamin you ever take. And so let me ask you about that now. Have you defined what your purpose you feel is? And if so, is this something that you can define quite easily?
It isn't something that I could define really easily. It does take time. I think when I'm asked this question directly, my purpose is to make better leaders. It's really that simple. And it's taken my life to this point to figure that out. I was in human resources for years, and I think my purpose, or what I would have told you was my purpose at the time, was to make life easier for people. And I still had to keep the business on my mind. Obviously, if a business isn't making money, there's no people working there. So I'd be a pretty terrible human resources manager. So the business had to keep in mind, but I was also there to make life easier for the employees, because the easier their lives were, the easier it was for them to come to work, the easier it was for them to heal after an accident, the easier it was. And so that, I would have told you, was my role. Life then happened, and I worked for a couple of companies that really didn't allow me to do that. And so my purpose got a little lost. The way their values were, they really didn't match mine. And so it was a constant battle on trying to fulfill what I thought was my purpose and still stay in line with what the company wanted. Right. And that really sent me for a loop. And then it took a long time to get to where I can say to you now, even though I stepped out and started doing coaching, it took me a long time to be able to say, no, I think my role is to create better leaders. And that's where I've moved to now. And it really is a passion of mine. And I didn't notice it until a friend said to me, I was started doing I'm just going to coach anyone. I first started my business. And my friend said to me, we were having a conversation one day, and she said, Lisa, you light up when you talk about leadership. Why aren't you coaching leaders? And the reality was, I had been the effect of working somewhere that doesn't meet your values had hit me so hard that I didn't want to step back into that. So I separated myself from that. And even though that had always been my goal, when I stepped into coaching, it was going to be for leadership, but I was so separated from it. It was just a bad experience working for those companies. And I separated, and now I can safely say again, no, it is to make better leaders. That's my purpose.
I love it. I mean, and this is another prime example of you sort of evolving, and the fact that these things, as we said, can be ever changing. Like, they don't have to be only one way, or again, as I'll call it, static or what have you. They can be an ever changing target or an ever moving target. So I love that as well. And so then the next question I'll ask you is what I call the passenger question. It's kind of what inspired this full show. Yes. So the question is pretty easy. It's if you were sitting next to a stranger on a plane and they asked you for some life advice, like they leaned over and said, hey, I need some help. I need some advice. What do you got? The question out of that is, what do you think you might tell that passenger who just leaned over to you?
Like anything else, this would change. And I've been thinking about it, obviously knowing that this was coming up. And I think for me right now, what I would say is ignore the shoulds. Do everything you can to erase the expectations that everyone else has put on you and start to understand what your own wants and needs are. The more that you are clear on what you want, the easier it is to move forward in life. The stuff that stops us from reaching our purpose or from moving towards our purpose is everything that everybody else has put on us. So the more you can erase those, the better life gets.
Wow, I love it. And you definitely did think about this.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously you knew that question was coming. The other question that you may or may not have known that was coming, because I've asked it so many times in the past, is the time machine question. And I will say, Lisa, this question is similar enough that I often worry that people are going to think it's the same question. Like, didn't you just ask me that? But I'll explain the difference pretty easily. So the time machine question is, if you could jump into a time machine, go back and talk to a younger Lisa, give her some life advice based on what you've learned in the years since, what do you think you might tell her? And the difference, obviously, in this question from the other is you're not telling a stranger this now. You're actually going to a younger Lisa that you might envision who needs that advice. So what do you think you might tell younger Lisa?
Ooh, when you fall down, stay down. So it sounds like we all say, get back up, get back up, get back up. The problem is if we don't stay down long enough, we don't understand what the problem is. So I am very much raised on a farm. When you fall off the horse, you get back on immediately. Well, you don't actually get back on immediately. You check the saddle first, because if the saddle fell over, you fix the saddle before you get back on the horse, right? So for me, there were times in my life that I was so low, and there were things I could have done to take a break, but I wouldn't give myself the break. I just kept going. And if I'd given myself those moments to rest, at one point I was terminated and had a 6-month severance, and I'd like jumped into getting another job right away. I needed to just take that month and rest.
So I love that. And I mean, I'm all about, one of the things I love about conversations is when you get to see different perspectives on stuff, like people give you a different take on it than sort of is the norm, like, for example, I mean, it's a weird example, but like I often talk about the fact that it takes more than 21 days to create a habit, and that's been proven, but everybody talks about 21 days to create a habit. One of the things I used to talk about often is the fact that we always say there's no I in team. And I agree that what's the other cliche? Teamwork makes the dream work. But at the same time, I think about it at the other way. Like, for example, if you look at like a Wayne Gretzky, yes, he was part of a team. Yes, he worked to be part of a team. But if Wayne didn't strive to be an individual as a player, the team wouldn't have been what the team was. Meaning, I believe that there is an I in team. I believe that there may be not I in the word team, but I believe that there's an I in it, in the sense that I think you should strive to be an individual. I think you should strive to be the best you can be, even outside of the team, but then remember that you're part of a team and trying to lift the team up. So like that's an example where I don't subscribe to the idea that there's no I in team. It's a short way to say that.
Well, and I love that, Corey, because here's the thing. No I in team equals codependence, and there's meetings for that. Right? There's Codependence Anonymous. So we don't want to lose all of our individuality in that team. We want to be who we are. And if we bring different members to the team, it's actually going to create something better. But if we all lose our individuality, then we're all just saying the same things, and you get all of the negative stuff that happens, right? When no one questions what's going on in society, there's a problem. I always say you always need a dissenter. Always. Somebody needs to dissent. Always. If you don't have someone on your team who's dissenting to the idea that you're coming forward with, it's not a good idea. Or somebody's lying.
Yes.
Somebody's lying.
Or they don't care enough about the idea. Like they're not passionate enough about the idea to even say it won't work. They're just like, whatever. Give it a try if you want. But I mean, and it works. Like, obviously it works on a sports team level, or a team where you're actively doing stuff, but in an office as well, right? Like, the idea that sometimes you might be in an office where you're part of a team, but it's a sinking ship team. Like everybody's negative and poisoning the well and stuff. And if you don't find a way to do something, and this something could be figure out a way to unite the team, or could be figure out a way to jump off the ship, whatever it is. But if you just go, let's go down with the ship because we're part of a team and they're all negative, so I might as well be too. So that's where I always get challenged by that quote. But here's the thing. I do also feel that almost every quote that exists, we could take, like we might agree with one, and another one we might disagree with. The truth is, if you look deep enough, you can find an alternative to every quote, right?
Yeah, a cog in that wheel. Yeah.
Like I mean, you could do that with some of the most amazing quotes of all time. And so I try to also like, for example, there's a quote by, and it's been quoted by either to Zig Ziglar or Charlie Tremendous Jones. But the gist is, you are the short version. I mean, because there's a bigger piece to it, but you are the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And then there's the one that says the only difference between the you of today and the you of 5 years' time will be the people that you meet and the books that you read. So I agree with that 100%. But what I'm saying is, somebody could say, but what about the effects this has on you? For example, what about the effects if you surround yourself with those 5 people, but then all of a sudden you reconnect with your parent who you had a bad relationship with, and it spins you in a different thing? Well, now you're not the sum total anymore of the 5. Like, what I'm saying is you could go deeper on any quote, but I think we just pick the ones we really like, and then the ones that don't resonate with us, we share a different perspective on it. So I love that you did that.
Yeah, thanks.
Awesome. So the last, and I'll call it unofficial question, but maybe the most important for somebody that's listening to us for a very short amount of time is, of course, how they can learn more. So I think it's important for people that have heard some powerful stuff and want to work with you, want to learn more about leadership, learn more about maybe your book, your writing, all that kind of stuff. Where would you send people?
Probably best places to my website. It's just simply LMW. Those are my initials, Lisa May Wilson, coaching.ca.
Easy. And on the book side, correct me if I'm wrong, but you have a book right now that's very much in the works and coming out to the world. Just as we close things off, can you tell us about that book?
Yeah, so the book is called Leading with Ease. And I talk about what I refer to as the 4 roots of leadership. I think that leaders can't be that solid building anymore. They have to be able to bend and shift like a tree. And so in the book, I talk about we still need roots. We still need something that holds us down and holds us in place. And I go through the 4 things that I think are the main root that a leader needs in order to be able to work in the environment that we deal with now, still have something solid, but bend as our world changes, because it changes so quickly now.